thinking about where you might go to rebuild that social fabric, which we talked about as having been lost. I saw you speak, regrettably not in person, at the National Conservatism Conference last year, and you made the case that amidst all this talk of a new Britain, which you hear constantly spoken about amongst British politicians, that it must be built on the matter of Britain. And you've touched on it at the moment, which is that settled history that goes back to the Iron Age. And within that, to summarize it, you're effectively saying you can't really avoid the religious origins of the country. And if you're going to, and if you are going to create any sense of shared home and settlement with each other, you need to share the same stories, have a shared sentiment, sing the same songs. And you said that liberal modernity denies us a common life, and that a borderless egalitarianism won't give us that either. So this has given you free range to delve into the things that make you passionate about the history of these isles. What could our shared stories and songs be?
Well, I know one thing that's very striking is that British people are still very intuitively attached to landscape, local history, walking, nature. Like this is, does feel like an unshakable kind of foundation that you can take anything else away, but people will still feel an emotional resonance with this kind of like deep encrusted compost of tradition and common life, even if it's muted because they've been cut off through its stories and traditions otherwise. And I think I don't think you're going to sort of suddenly rebuild that through a kind of king and country wave the flag sort of like Tweedy kind of revivalism. I mean, that's going to work for some people, no doubt. I'm not necessarily denouncing it, but I think the thing that really it works is more the sort of David Jones thing. So if you know David Jones, the Welsh poet and painter, he wrote one of the great World War I poems that's sadly not taught in schools, which would be a good start for this sort of thing, in parenthesis. And that's all about this kind of mythic, psychic landscape in which sort of history's kind of myth are blended together into a kind of a living whole. And I know that sounds very abstract, but at the same time, I think it's also in some ways the least abstract thing, because it's actually what we encounter. We can rationalize and make things all we like, our country and our history and our culture, but you go out into Britain and you encounter it all at once. The Middle Ages is there in a church right next to the 18th century town hall, right next to the 17th century pub, right next to the kind of 20th century tenement housing. It's all running together, and the ideas and the poetry and the lives that have touched those are all there. And you can ignore them. You can refuse to represent them in education and culture and the BBC, as some people seem keen to do. And you can try and replace them with ersatz stories you've sort of gleaned from America or something. But it doesn't. It's going to skate off ultimately, and Britain will still be there waiting for you. And I think it's always there to be rediscovered.
Well, that's a lovely sentiment, and it reminds me of a Substacker that I spoke to recently. He goes by Brother Alexander, and he writes a Substack called The Tower of Adam. But he's actually just started one called The Institute of England, and effectively what he's trying to do with some fellow concerned people is revive a love of England, because England, there are lots of people who say this, Paul Kingsnorth being one of them, the Orthodox Christian writer, that England is one of the only places that won't know any folk songs of its own. It's lost any sense of its heritage because of the scale of modernizing in the latter half of the 20th century. And anyway, what Alex is trying to do is he's inviting people to come and write about the things that make them love England. And interestingly, when we spoke about it, he was talking about the landscapes, what people feel when they're out there. And some of the people who've written for it so far have been, such a typically English hobby, actually. You've got bird watchers there. And the description of it, you know, even if you hadn't set foot in England yet, and then you read the article, you can get this vivid feel as to what the place is. And you're right, is that actually, forget the abstract ideals, is as this, you know, as any place on this earth, there's a feel and there's an atmosphere, and yeah, go and engage with it, go and participate in it. So I thought I think that's a lovely project, and it's only been going since the beginning of the month, I think, and and I wish it all the best, because it's one of those things which is trying to be. Now, I'm not trying to be political. I just want to talk about what we love about this place that we share together. That's nice. But let's get on back onto some harder stuff. There's not harder stuff, but perhaps.
Can I just say before we go on to the hard stuff, I'm just really good. Just that thing that you said about it's not being political. I think it is.
Yeah.
But I think it is political because it's not. So, like, this is something I thought when I saw the questions you sent me, which is that, you know, so the critic, obviously it's got a political brand and the rest of it, but more than half of what we publish in print and online is not political. You know, especially in the physical mag, it's mostly art and culture. And then we've got a few features. But I think something like I was watching Kenneth Clark's Civilization lately, and I don't know if you know this, but it got put on the prevent list of like in-text and forbidden text or whatever, you know, like dodgy things written by, you know, because I think because it had attracted conservative and even reactionary sort of interest, and the sort of distant right thing. And I think the reason, you know, Kenneth Clark is clearly not a reactionary or even probably conservative. He's giving a fairly straight, liberal, middle of the century account of history. But the thing is, because it simply presents the civilizational scale idea, there's no, without any nods towards like culture, towards sort of, but of course it was very oppressive. Like, because he just sort of treats it in this clear-eyed, very critical, but not moralistic way. And he opens the door to it, and he lets you pass through. I think that, I don't want to say apolitical, but that sort of generous, almost Socratic way of approaching culture, I think has become a radical political act just because of where institutions like the BBC, where the national curriculum's gone, where, you know, your average English faculty is, God help us, you know, just like teaching Shakespeare straight in an English faculty now would be a political act, not because it should be, but because of where we are.
That's a fascinating point, and anyone who hasn't seen Civilization by Kenneth Clark should do. I think you can only watch it on YouTube now. You can't find it on the BBC iPlayer